Welcome back. The takedown of a 1911 ranks to me as one of the easier guns of all to take down and maintain. It was made to be easily field stripped. Now granted, it's not quite as easy as some of the more recent offerings that have been made by companies, but it's still not a difficult gun to take down. I see some very unfortunate write-ups on blogs, people using hammers to drive the link pin out, and it's very, very unfortunate. What I want to show you is the simplest method that I was taught when I was in the Army back in the 60s. Simply make sure you have safety glasses on. It's very important because you're dealing with a couple of springs here that could easily take your eye out. First of all, empty the gun. Make sure, satisfy yourself that the gun is completely clear. Check your magazine well in your chamber. Return the slide back to battery. Place the safety in the on position. If you want to know why I allowed my gun to just simply drop like that, watch my video, very short 4.5-minute video on that issue. Make sure your slide is in the up and locked position. Turn the grip so that it's facing to your right with the barrel pointed in the upward direction, and depress the plunger cap, the spring plunger cap, which is at the base of the bushing. Now you can either use just this here as a tool, as I did when I was in the military, or you may have a bushing wrench, which you can also use, and that's made of polymer. There are steel ones, and the steel ones can mar your surfaces, especially if you have a blued gun. But in any case, simply depress, turn that bushing toward you. Whether it's with your thumb pressure, turn it toward you and allow that to gently come up and retrieve the cap. That cap is very, very dangerously positioned where that could take your eye out and wipe out some fixtures nearby too. So place that aside. You'll notice that the bushing right now is turned toward you. Simply turn it through the spring coils. Now you've seen some people, I'm sure, that have pulled the spring out, but I prefer not to do that because you can force those coils to be detorqued. There is some pressure there that would have to be exerted to pull that off of the rod without guiding it. Once you've turned that bushing away from you, the keyway is now relieved, and this will slide. The bushing will slide straight out from the barrel, and you can set that aside. Turn the gun over. Drop your safety. Press the slide to the rear, and you'll notice now this is extremely important. This is where everybody gets fouled up. After only retrieving the barrel less than 1.5 inches from the slide and barrel relationship, less than 1.5 inches, you'll notice right here there is a notch behind the large notch. We're ignoring this large notch. This is the slide stop notch. This is not the notch where you pass the slide stop nose through. The slide stop nose has to come through this barely imperceptible, you can see it right here, there's a very, very shallow notch that's about 1/2 inch behind the slide stop notch, and that is where you position the nose of the slide stop. This is the nose of the slide stop. We're not dealing with this end, we're dealing with this end. If you notice on the back of the pistol there is a pin, simply pushes straight through with your finger pressure. Just the weight of my finger is all that's necessary to push that through. Now, this is where everybody scratches up there. A lot of people unfortunately scratch up their 45s or 9mm or 38 supers, whatever your case may be. But keep this thumb positioned below that slide stop so that it doesn't run down and rake your bluing, and simply pull it straight out with your finger pressure. That's all there is to it. It's very, very easy. It just slides in and out. There's no resistance whatsoever. And let me say this: if you ever encounter any resistance whatsoever when you're dealing with anything to do with the 45, the 1911, be very sure you just simply stop what you're doing, because you're doing something absolutely wrong. There is no resistance encountered. There's no need for any hammers. There's no need for any kind of tools up to this point. Once you've got that, leave your safety in the off position and simply pull your slide off the grip frame. That's all there is to it. Turn your slide over, pull the rod and the spring up through the center of the slide, remove it, and allow the barrel to slide straight out from the slide. That's all there is to it. It's a very, very simple disassembly. So you've got your lower housing, your grip frame assembly, you've got your barrel assembly, which includes, this is your link, and this is a link pin here. The other, this is what this pin slides in, and this is what holds your barrel into battery when it's locked. So that's all there is to it. And the rod and spring assembly, there's no need to disassemble those parts. You can pull those apart, but I don't like to pull them from the very end out here, because you can uncoil, you can pull on those coils, and you can actually change the spring pressure. I prefer to grab it down here where you're not pulling on all the coils and simply slide it off. Now, most of these guns have a very tight collar right here. This is where it captures that spring. The spring has got it's got a coiled end which is tapered, and it's got a non-coiled end which is towards the front of the barrel. You want to always be sure that your spring is situated so that the tightly wound section is at this end, and it's positioned all the way up against the yoke of the pin right here, that rod. Clean the barrel off. It's a very simple process. Clean it out. You just take a cotton swab of the correct diameter, flush it out with solvent. Now, my preference is to use either just simple mineral spirits, which is started solvent found in most gun solvents, or hoppies, something like that, because I like the smell of this stuff. This is good cologne. I'm only kidding. Don't use it. It'll probably break you out into a rash. But those are the simple things that you need to use to get and gunk out of a 45. What you're dealing with in most, in virtually all situations, is the graphite residue which is left behind when the powder burns. Graphite is used in the tumbling of powder to keep it from caking and to keep it pouring nicely. So that graphite doesn't burn off, and that's the blackness that you see all over everything. And some powders are worse than others in that regard. And there is that combined with some carbon fouling that needs to be removed. Carbon and graphite are the simplest things in the world to remove. They come off very easily by just wiping them off with solvent. You don't need to use any aggressive solvents. You don't need to treat your gun with anything. It frustrates me quite a bit to hear about people using exotic lubricants and solvents and things like that somehow or another are supposed to embed themselves into this steel. This is not steel that's going to soak up anything. This steel is impervious to any sort of process whatsoever that you could ever put into it. It's stainless steel. It's got no porosity whatsoever. Now, if you want to break down your slide further in order to clean it, and I recommend that you don't do this very often, because there's really no necessity. Now I'm gonna take this firing pin out and the extractor out to show you. This gun has fired many hundreds of rounds since I've had that firing pin and extractor out, and you'll see how much dirt is in there. All that you need to do that is to take a simple drift pin. Just simply press down on the firing pin. Make sure you have your safety glasses on. When you push down on that firing pin, you'll notice that you can slide this retainer down towards the grooved notches. Simply push that down. Keep your thumb over the firing pin. You want to push forward on that retainer as you capture the firing pin. You can feel it come up under your thumb, under your fingers. Now you've got your retainer, and you've got the firing pin, and spring. An important feature of Ruger's design is that they went back to the 70 series, which could not be used previously with great safety, because the 70 series Colt style could easily go off simply because the weight, the mass of the firing pin, the weight of the firing pin with a very, very slack spring. It was very easy to drive forward if the pistol was dropped, and that would strike the primer and discharge the gun. And this is not just theory. I experienced that sort of thing once myself in Vietnam. I've mentioned it before. It's a horror show. You don't want to have that happen. This is a titanium firing pin, very, very low mass, virtually no weight. It would weigh only a few grams, and it's a heavier duty spring than the standard 1911 spring. So between having a low mass firing pin and a heavier spring, there's absolutely no chance of this ever being discharged by dropping it. The next thing you can do is to remove the extractor. The extractor is this round piece right here. Simply get underneath it and lift it straight out I'm not bearing down on this surface here. I'm not using this as a fulcrum. You want to just simply use your finger as a fulcrum and pull it straight up. You can see as I'm using my finger as a fulcrum, pull it straight up until you can get enough of a grasp of it, and just simply pull it out. That's all there is to it. Now this is a bowed surface. This is bowed in this direction right here. It has this concave, convex on one side, concave on the other. That provides the torque necessary to get around that cartridge rim and to pull it out. So when you reinsert that, I'll show you what you do to accommodate it. But in the meantime, I wanted to show you the sort of dirt that you might expect to find inside those holes after firing hundreds of rounds. And as I say, I've fired many hundreds of rounds. Simply take a Q-tip and go down inside, and you can move it around, and that's the extent of it right there. That's all I've got for carbon after all those rounds have been fired. So it's really not even an issue. Once in a while, maybe every so many months of shooting, take your Q-tip, go down and clean that out. And I got a little bit more out of the extractor than I did out of the firing pin, which is not that wouldn't be unusual to me. But again, it's not a great amount. So go down, bring that out. Be very, very sure. Look down through with a bore light, and I use a bore light here. One of these lights right here that is a pen light, very inexpensive. You can look down through. See if I can angle that. You can see. You can look and be sure that you don't have any fuzz from that Q-tip. You don't want to have anything left in there. Make sure it's absolutely clear and clean. Okay, so now we're just going to reassemble that. The extractor is simply positioned so that the extractor notch and the flat side of this, the top of it right here, is towards the center of the slide. In other words, thusly. You can see it keeps moving on me. You just want to position it in that direction right there with the flats all aligned. Now, again, we need to pull this toward you because it's bowed. Once it clears this notch right here, it should slide straight in. And just slide it in so that everything is flush. You want to push it down with your finger. This should be flush right here, so that there's no. You don't want to go below that surface. If you do, you're not going to be able to get your retainer back into that slide. I want to check and make sure that I've got clearance there. Take my drift pin and move that drift pin up in between. You can see, if I can position this so you can see with the camera here. I want to take my drift pin and position it right here in that notch, and make sure that I have the inner surfaces flush. That'll provide for the retainer to slide up inside. Take your retainer and just check that before you And now you'll notice that there's a cut surface on one side and it's flush on the other side. The flush side, the non-cut side, goes towards the gun. The arch goes toward the arch of this slide frame right here, and that should just simply move right in there without any resistance. As you can see, this is typical. This is the sort of movement you want to see. It just flops right in. Once you have it in that manner, take your firing pin, spring first, press it straight in. Use great care not to allow that to pop out, because you're going to be chasing it around your basement. Take your retainer again, slide that. This is kind of a tricky maneuver. You want to take the firing pin, press it as far as you can with your finger until you can capture that with the retainer. Once you've captured it with the retainer, like that, you can see that. Once you've captured it with the edge of the retainer, simply take your drift pin and push the firing pin all the way in. It should slide right in just like that and pop right into place. Be sure that your firing pin has got free movement, and make sure that it protrudes above the retainer. Now, turn your slide over. The barrel slides in from the front of the gun with the toggle. The link has to be facing towards the front of the barrel. Slide that straight in and let it drop into place. It has to drop in so that your cuts right here inside made up with the cuts on the top of the barrel, and it's locked into place. Now, your spring, make sure that you'll notice that there's a yoke on this. That yoke is downward towards the barrel. This curvature right here, that curvature goes down toward the barrel. Slide the spring straight in, and you want to have that yoke down on the barrel, and you also want to have it on the narrow section of the barrel. In other words, it shouldn't be past that narrow section of the barrel. There's a cut on that. There's a turn on that barrel right here. You want to have the shoulder of that yoke right there. Place your slide on. Just slide it gently forward, and you don't want to go any farther than that. Just tip the gun up. You'll notice there's a gap right here. That's fine. Now, when the up position, when you do it upside down, it very frequently will hang up. You just simply want to have it straight up and down and slide the slide to the rear. And again, watch for that small notch, not the larger notch, just this small notch right here. Bring that all the way back to this position right here until it's right across this square cut. This square cut is where the nose of your slide stop will go. Now you'll notice that on this side there's a hole. You should at this time see the link and the holes line up. If they don't, just simply position the slide back and forth until you see that the hole and that link line up. Place your thumb right here as a safety precaution so you don't scar your gun. Drop the slide stop in. You notice it just simply dropped right in, nothing to it. Now, press this. That's all there is to it. No hammering, no tools, no nothing. Now, bring your slide forward. Place your safety in the on position. We want to return this bushing. You want to notice that there's a Woodruff key right on the side of this bushing. That has to go into this keyway, the center keyway that's right between the spring and the barrel. So just simply slide it over the barrel and straight down. Once it's in flush, turn it all the way toward you. Again, we have the grip to my right. You have the bushing turned toward you. Place the cap back on the spring. Make sure your safety glasses are on. Press straight down. Turn the bushing all the way around until it snaps into place. That's all there is to field stripping a 1911. I'll go through the safety checks that are involved with this gun to make sure that you have a gun that's completely operative. First of all, check the slide. Make sure it moves freely. There should be no resistance except for the spring pressure. And check your safety. Make sure that your safety turns on and off with a solid click. Check that your safety is in the full on position. Make sure that you cannot fire the pistol with that safety on. Put the safety off, and with the grip safety not contacted, pull on the trigger. You should not be able to fire the gun with your hand off the grip. Place your hand on the grip safety and it should go off. That's all there is to it. Another check is to be sure that if you want to check your disconnector. Your disconnector is in the top of the grip frame. If that is moved off of its notch, its clearance notch, the gun should not fire. That ensures that that's to ensure that the gun will not fire until the cartridge is in fully battery, that the slide is fully into battery safely. So push it back just less than 1/16 of an inch and pull your trigger, and it should not go off. And again, it should go off if you depress your trigger. Those are your safeties. Now, you want to check and make sure you have hammer clearance here. This should pull to the rear. And when you fire it, it should be all the way solid forward, and there should be no play whatsoever. The typical trigger pressure on a government style 45 can be anywhere from 4.5 to 8 pounds of pressure. Those are all within specs. It should be a clean break without any perceptible creep or drag. This has got one of those nice triggers, and I do not recommend that you try to have a trigger worked on to bring the pull weight down below 4.5 to 5 pounds. If you do, you're going to have a gun which will be unsafe. If you ever have a situation where you have what's called follow down, in other words, if your hammer is following down on the slide when the slide comes forward, if you are firing at the line, if you're firing and you notice that you've fired one shot and the second shot won't go off, and your hammer is in this position here, you have a follow down. That means that the hammer followed the slide forward, and it won't go off. It typically will not go off. That's one of the safety features of the 1911. The 1911, by the way, it's got a half cock safety right here. That half cock safety is one of the more unsafe ways to carry a 45. The half cock safety is difficult to manipulate. You have to pull it back with your finger off of the trigger. Be sure you pull it back off the trigger. That's imperative. It doesn't provide as much safety as having the regular safety in the on position. When it's in the half cocked position, the hammer and sear have a pretty snug relationship, but it's not as tight as when you have the safety in the full on position. In this position right here, you're actually blocking the hammer. The hammer cannot fall. Furthermore, that position allows you for a much quicker draw, a much quicker response in a combat situation. It's simply a matter of sliding the safety off and you're ready to go. That's it. So those are the procedures for taking down your 1911 pistol and servicing, just giving it a field service. I hope that you stay tuned for my other videos. Please subscribe. God bless.